In the bleak winter of 1959, when the winds of the Ural Mountains howled like lost souls, a group of 9 young hikers set out on what was meant to be the adventure of their lives. They were students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, skilled mountaineers, full of promise and strength. At the head of the group was Igor Dyatlov, just 23 years old, brilliant, methodical, and respected by everyone who knew him. To his friends, he was a leader by nature, calm, disciplined, always thinking 3 steps ahead. The group he assembled was hand-picked, the best and most experienced he could find. There was Zina Kolmogorova, known for her courage, Rustem Slobodin, a man of immense endurance, Lyudmila Dubinina, fierce and determined, and others whose names would one day echo in history, not for what they achieved, but for how they died. Their goal was to reach Mount Torton, a remote peak deep within the northern Urals. The journey was part of their quest to earn the highest hiking certification in the Soviet Union, a mark of excellence for any mountaineer, but none of them could have imagined that the mountain would instead take their names forever. On January 23rd, they departed from Sverdlovsk, their spirits high, their notebooks filled with sketches, plans, and laughter. Photographs taken at train stations show smiling faces, warm embraces, and confident postures, the kind of joy that only the young and hopeful carry before stepping into the unknown. As the days passed, the landscape began to shift. Civilization fell behind, the snow grew thicker, the sky darker, and the temperature dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Each day, they trudged through blizzards, carrying heavy rucksacks and skis, their faces bitten raw by the cold. They wrote diaries chronicling each moment, small jokes, minor injuries, their meals of condensed milk and biscuits, and the endless struggle against the biting wind. Yet between the lines of optimism, something subtle began to change. Their words became shorter, their tone more serious. The mountain, known to the local Mansi tribes as Kholat Syakhl, Mountain of the Dead, was beginning to live up to its name. By February 1st, they had reached the slope of that very mountain. The wind screamed across the white wilderness, erasing their footprints as soon as they were made. Dyatlov decided to set up camp on the exposed face of the slope rather than descend into the forest below. Some say he made that choice to test the group's skill. Others believe he simply wanted to stay on course. Whatever the reason, it was a decision that sealed their fate. The group pitched their tent, a long canvas stretched against wooden skis. Inside, they huddled together, marking their final entry in the diary with the same hope that had guided them so far. "We are fine. We'll reach Torton tomorrow." But that tomorrow would never come. In the following hours, the mountain turned against them. The air grew heavy, and the wind carried an unnatural hum, a deep, rolling moan that seemed to come from the earth itself. The storm rose with terrifying speed, burying the tent in snow, shaking its thin walls like paper. Somewhere in that endless frozen night, something or someone drove them to do the unthinkable. The tent, later found by rescuers, had been slashed open from the inside. Barefoot footprints led away from it into the darkness, scattered, chaotic, as if 9 people had fled into the blizzard without reason, without shoes, without sanity. What made them run? Fear? Panic? Something unseen in the white void? No one knows. But as the storm screamed over the mountain, 9 lives were swallowed whole, their laughter, their plans, their youth, all erased beneath the silent snow. And from that night onward, the Dyatlov Pass would never be just another place on the map. It would become a question that refuses to die, a whisper carried by every gust of cold Ural wind, asking again and again, what happened here? Weeks passed before anyone realized the hikers were missing. The days in the Ural Mountains bled into one another, buried under layers of storm and silence. When the group failed to return by their expected date, the families grew restless, then terrified. Soon, Search teams were sent out. Soldiers, students, mountaineers, and even planes flying low over the endless white wilderness. But the mountains gave nothing away easily. It was February 26th when rescuers finally spotted something strange through the snow. A patch of orange fabric barely visible on the slope of Kolatsyakl. It was Dyatlov's tent. They expected to find the hikers inside, huddled together, perhaps frozen in their sleep. But what they found defied all logic. The tent had been slashed open from the inside. Every sign pointed to a sudden and frantic escape. Boots, jackets, food, even money and cameras were left behind as if they had run in sheer terror. The hikers' clothing lay scattered, some half-dressed, some with only one shoe, others barefoot. The snow outside told a story of confusion. Barefoot footprints, some leading down the slope, some circling, some vanishing mid-step. 9 sets of tracks, fading into nothing. As the rescuers followed the trail, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. About half a mile down the slope, beneath a large cedar tree, they found the first 2 bodies, Krivonishenko and Doroshenko. Both were barefoot, dressed only in underwear and torn shirts. Their skin was darkened by frost, their fingers covered in deep cuts, as if they had clawed desperately at the tree in their final moments. Above them, broken branches stretched nearly 15 feet high, a sign that they had tried to climb for safety, or perhaps to see something in the storm. Nearby, the faint remains of a fire flickered out, nothing more than ashes in the snow. A little further up the slope lay 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova and Slobodin, positioned as if they had been crawling back toward the tent. Their faces were frozen in mid-motion, their hands outstretched, as though reaching for a home they would never see again. Dyatlov's body showed bruises and a fractured skull. Slobodin's had a strange dent in the head, but no external wound that could explain it. They had fallen not from exhaustion alone, something else had struck them down. Still, 4 hikers were missing. The mountain refused to reveal them for over 2 more months. When the thaw came, rescuers ventured deeper into the woods and found a small ravine, a shallow den hidden beneath the snow. There they discovered the remaining bodies, Dubinina, Thibaut Brignol, Kolevatov, and Zolotaryov. But this discovery only deepened the horror. Dubinina's body was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips, as if carved away by an unseen hand. Her chest was caved in, ribs crushed from an internal force. Thibaut Brignol's skull was shattered, yet his skin bore no external marks. Zolotaryov's ribs were broken, and his eyes were gone. The injuries were unlike anything rescuers had seen. Massive internal trauma, yet no wounds, as though something powerful had struck them from within. The ravine itself was strangely organized. The 4 had built a small den, lined with branches and pieces of clothing, suggesting they had survived longer than the others. But the question remained, what drove them to flee the safety of their tent into sub-zero temperatures, half naked, in the middle of a violent snowstorm? What forced them to scatter in panic, as if fleeing from something that couldn't be seen or understood? When investigators examined the scene, they noted something else. Many of the victims' clothes contained traces of radiation, faint but undeniable. Cameras found in the tent showed eerie, blurred images of glowing orbs in the night sky. Strange orange spheres that locals also reported seeing that same week. Soldiers, when questioned, spoke of secret military tests nearby, but their words quickly vanished into silence. The Dyatlov Pass case was unlike anything the Soviet authorities had ever encountered. It was not just death, it was chaos sculpted by fear. The more they uncovered, the less sense it made. 9 bright, healthy, capable people had gone into the mountains, and something had driven them to madness, violence, and death. By the end of that winter, the snow melted, but the truth did not. The official report closed with a single, haunting line. The deaths of the group were caused by a compelling natural force. But no one could explain what that force was. And as the years passed, that tent, that frozen slope, and those 9 bodies became something else, a legend, a warning, and a mystery that would haunt the Ural Mountains forever. When news of the hikers' fate spread, the Soviet Union was gripped by disbelief. Newspapers printed only what they were permitted to. Brief, sanitized accounts that mentioned a tragic accident during a winter expedition. But behind the closed doors of investigators and military officials, the tone was far different. They knew this was no ordinary tragedy. Something had happened on that mountain that defied all logic. Something that even the language of science could not describe. The rescue teams who first arrived at the site could never forget what they saw. The tent, half buried in snow, flapping silently in the wind, still held the hikers' belongings neatly arranged inside. Food ready to cook, diaries, shoes lined up as if their owners were only steps away. It looked like a moment frozen in time, interrupted by pure terror. The investigators could not understand why 9 experienced mountaineers, facing -30 degrees, would cut open their tent from the inside and flee barefoot into the night. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints from intruders, and no evidence of an avalanche large enough to justify such panic. It was as though they had been compelled to run, not from nature but from something unseen. As each body was brought down from the mountain, the details grew darker. The mortuary reports spoke of extreme internal injuries, comparable to those found in high-speed car crashes, yet with no external damage to explain the force. The hikers' skin had an unusual orange tint, and their hair appeared darker, almost grey. When questioned, one pathologist whispered, "I've never seen anything like it." The radiation readings taken from some of their clothes only deepened the fear. Radiation was not uncommon in the Soviet Union, especially near test zones, but this was the Ural wilderness, remote, untouched, and far from known contamination sites. The investigators began to notice something else, the inconsistencies in the timeline. According to the hikers' diaries, their last recorded entry was cheerful, written on the night of February 1st. The next morning, they were all dead. Yet when the search teams arrived weeks later, the bodies were found in different states of decomposition, suggesting they had died at slightly different times. Could some of them have survived longer than others? Had they fought to stay alive while others froze in the dark? Near the cedar tree, remnants of torn clothing indicated that the survivors had stripped the dead to stay warm, a grim act of desperation that spoke to the final terrible hours of the Dyatlov group. And then came the photographs. Rescuers developed film found in the tent, expecting to see only routine images of the hike, but the last few frames were unlike anything else. Dark, chaotic shots of the night sky, glowing streaks of light, blurred figures, and one image showing what looked like a bright orb descending through the snowstorm. Whether it was a camera malfunction, a flash reflection, or something far stranger, no one could say. Witnesses from nearby villages began to surface. Several locals from the Munsi tribe told investigators that, during the same nights the hikers disappeared, they had seen glowing orange spheres hovering above the northern ridge. They described them as silent, pulsing and moving against the wind. The soldiers stationed hundreds of miles away reported the same. Mysterious lights in the sky, drifting slowly before vanishing behind the clouds. Soviet intelligence quickly silenced these reports, labeling them classified, but the whispers could not be contained. Behind the scenes, theories multiplied. Some officials believed the hikers had stumbled upon a secret military experiment, perhaps parachute mines or radiological tests. Others whispered that the group had seen something they were never meant to see, and the government wanted it buried beneath snow and silence. But none of those explanations accounted for the strangeness of their deaths. The missing tongue, the broken ribs without bruises, the terrified expressions frozen into their faces. Forensic experts sent from Moscow were told to close the case quickly. They examined the bodies once more, wrote their reports carefully, and filed them away. The final conclusion, a compelling natural force, satisfied no one. It was a phrase so vague, so deliberately obscure, that it felt like an insult to the dead. Families who demanded answers were told to stop asking questions. Some of them received their children's belongings sealed in boxes that had clearly been tampered with. Photographs were missing. Notes were censored. The message was clear. The truth about Dyatlov Pass was not meant for the public. Yet even under pressure, the whispers grew. Some of the rescuers began to fall ill after their return. Nausea, fatigue, and strange rashes that no one could explain. Others spoke of nightmares, of hearing the sound of screaming wind that didn't belong to memory, but to something deeper. The mountain seemed to have taken something from all who visited it. By the end of spring, the snow had melted, and the investigation was quietly shut down. The world moved on. But those who had seen that campsite, the torn tent, the frozen bodies, the mutilated faces, would never forget. They knew that something was still out there, watching from the ridges of the Ural Mountains, where the wind still carried that whisper of death through the pines. In the years that followed, Dyatlov Pass became more than a tragedy. It became an obsession. Scientists, soldiers, psychics, journalists, and ordinary people all tried to decode the riddle of that frozen night in 1959. The official explanation was thin, a compelling natural force. But what force could crush ribs without breaking skin? What kind of storm drives trained mountaineers to tear through their tent and flee barefoot into the black heart of a blizzard? Each theory that emerged tried to fill the silence, but each only deepened it. The first and most convenient theory was the avalanche. Soviet authorities leaned on it heavily, and for decades it remained the official stance. According to this explanation, a sudden slab of snow slid down the slope, collapsing part of the tent, and the hikers, thinking they were about to be buried alive, panicked and fled into the night. But this theory never quite fit. The slope of Kholat Shakal was too shallow for a major avalanche, and when rescuers arrived weeks later, the tent was still standing, partially upright, with gear and skis untouched. If a wall of snow had swept through, there should have been chaos, debris, buried supplies or broken branches. There were none. Moreover, the hikers were seasoned. They knew avalanches. Why would 9 skilled mountaineers flee calmly, single file, away from the tent instead of grabbing their boots or clothes? And how could an avalanche cause crushed chests and fractured skulls, yet leave no external injuries? The avalanche theory felt too clean, too simple for what they found. Then came the military test theory. Rumors circulated that in early February 1959, the Soviet military had been conducting secret experiments in the Ural Mountains, perhaps testing parachute mines or radiological weapons. The glowing orbs reported by locals and the traces of radiation on some of the hikers' clothes gave this theory weight. Parachute mines, when detonated, could produce shockwaves strong enough to cause internal trauma similar to what the victims suffered. Massive pressure injuries without visible wounds. The sound alone, a low, thunderous pulse, could disorient and terrify anyone nearby. If Dyatlov's team had accidentally entered a testing zone, the theory suggested, the blasts may have triggered panic and chaos. But the Soviet Union, secretive and unforgiving in those years, would never confirm it. The files were classified, witnesses silenced, and even years later, when declassified, many pages were missing, blacked out, erased, or stamped restricted. Another, more psychological theory emerged: infrasound panic. Scientists later proposed that a rare wind phenomenon known as the Kármán vortex street could have created low-frequency vibrations around the mountain, deep, rumbling tones below the range of human hearing. Such frequencies, some believed, could trigger intense fear, nausea, and disorientation in humans. In the confined space of their tent, those invisible waves might have induced an overwhelming sense of dread, driving the hikers to flee without reason, stripping in confusion, collapsing in the cold. It was an elegant theory, poetic even, but it failed to explain the broken ribs, the missing tongue, and the radiation. Sound alone cannot crush bone or darken skin. The longer investigators searched for logic, the further they strayed into the realm of the supernatural. Some said the group had angered the spirits of the mountain, which the Mansi people called sacred and forbidding. The mountain's name, Kholat Shakal, means dead mountain, and according to legend, 9 Mansi hunters once vanished there, never to return. To the locals, Dyatlov's group had awakened an ancient curse. When rescuers arrived, they noted the eerie silence of the place. No animals, no birds, no footprints but the hikers. Even the air felt wrong. Those who believed in spirits said the hikers hadn't died from fear or weather, but from something watching, something that moves between the snow and the wind, unseen but felt. Others ventured into stranger possibilities, UFOs, secret weapons, or extraterrestrial contact. The strange lights captured in the hikers' final photographs, the glowing orbs reported in nearby towns, and the way the bodies were found, eyes and tongue missing, as if dissected, gave rise to whispers of alien involvement. It sounded absurd, yet it fit the atmosphere of the Cold War, when both American and Soviet forces were racing to dominate not just the skies, but perhaps what lay beyond them. In 1990, decades after the tragedy, the case was briefly reopened, but even with new technology and re-examinations, no one could produce a definitive answer. In 2019, the Russian government once again investigated, this time with modern forensic methods. Their conclusion, another variation of the avalanche theory, satisfied few. Modern computer models suggested that a small, delayed slab avalanche could indeed have caused the injuries, and fear of further collapse might have driven the hikers out. But still, many experts rejected it. There was no sign of large snow movement at the site. The tent's position didn't match the pattern. The mystery remained intact. Today, Dyatlov Pass stands as both a crime scene and a monument, visited by those drawn to its silence, its emptiness, and the questions that refuse to die. Theories fill books, documentaries, and late-night debates, but none can truly explain what the rescuers saw in that snow. The mountain keeps its secret well, guarded by wind and time, and as every gust whistles over Kholat Shakal, it still carries that same ancient echo, a sound like a whisper, a warning, a memory of 9 lives lost to something colder than nature itself. More than 6 decades have passed since that winter night on the slopes of Kholat Shakal, yet the wind that sweeps across Dyatlov Pass still feels heavy with questions. Every year, new footprints mark the snow where Igor Dyatlov and his team once walked. Modern hikers come armed with GPS trackers, thermal suits, and technology the 1959 group could never have imagined. But when night falls and the mountain breathes its icy sighs, even they admit to feeling something unsettling in the air. It's as though the storm itself remembers. What remains of the Dyatlov group are fragments, photographs frozen in time, letters written with warmth and optimism, diaries that end abruptly mid-sentence. In one of the last entries, a hiker wrote, "We are getting stronger with every day. This place is beautiful." Those words, innocent and calm, now read like an epitaph carved into the cold. Their journals were filled with laughter, sketches and camaraderie, yet their story became a symbol of dread, shrouded in mystery and grief. When the last of their bodies were laid to rest in Sverdlovsk, the funerals were quiet, guarded, almost secretive. The Soviet government forbade public gatherings, fearing unrest or speculation. Yet hundreds came anyway, Classmates, friends, strangers, all trying to make sense of what had happened. Parents spoke through tears, asking why no one was allowed to see the real reports. Some were told their children had died peacefully. Others were warned to stop asking questions. One mother reportedly said, "Peacefully, my daughter had no eyes." Over the decades, Dyatlov Pass transformed from a tragedy into a legend, a mirror reflecting the fears of each generation. In the 1960s, it was a Cold War cover-up. In the 1970s, a story whispered in secret among soldiers. By the 1990s, it became a ghost tale, a mystery fed by declassified documents and grainy photographs that circulated on early Russian forums. Each era tried to explain it in its own language, but the result was always the same: disbelief, fascination, and silence. Even the landscape itself seems complicit in the myth. The trees where the first bodies were found still stand, twisted and scarred, their branches reaching into the grey sky like skeletal fingers. The wind there doesn't howl. It murmurs, low and continuous, carrying sounds that sometimes resemble distant voices. Many who visit say they feel watched, that the mountain carries an unseen presence. Perhaps it's only imagination, stirred by history. Or perhaps some echoes never truly fade. In 2013, a team of independent researchers returned to the site armed with drones, sensors, and forensic expertise. They confirmed what the rescuers had said all along. There was no trace of an avalanche large enough to cause the injuries or destruction reported. Yet even with modern tools, they left with more questions than answers. The mountain gave them no new clues, only silence, the same silence that has kept it secret for 66 years. Still, the Dyatlov case refuses to die. Books, documentaries, and even films have tried to capture its haunting power, each retelling keeping the 9 hikers alive in memory. Their faces, young, smiling, forever caught between youth and eternity, stare out from black and white photographs as if waiting for the truth to find them. Their names: Igor, Zina, Liuda, Rustem, Yuri, Sasha, Thibaut, and the rest, have become carved into Russian folklore, their story told like a warning whispered by the wind, that even the bravest hearts can fall victim to forces we do not understand. In 2019, the Russian authorities reopened the case one final time. Once again, the verdict came back: avalanche. But by then, the world had stopped believing in official answers. The Dyatlov mystery had grown beyond reports and logic. It had become something else, a symbol of how fragile human reason becomes in the face of nature's cruelty and the unknown's vastness. To this day, mountaineers say the same thing before they climb that ridge, not as a joke, but as a quiet prayer. Don't listen when the wind begins to whisper, because on that mountain, the storm doesn't just howl. It speaks in low, ancient tones, carrying the last echoes of those 9 souls who vanished into its mouth. And if you stand there long enough, in the bitter wind and silence, you might hear it too. A soft voice, somewhere between the snow and the sky, whispering what no one lived to tell. When a storm whispers death, the mountain remembers.